because it is surprisingly difficult to understand what's going on. If you watch any video that's been kind of auto-captioned, turn the sound off and try and follow it. And a lot of the time it gets quite complicated and quite difficult to follow. So yeah, definitely not what we want when thinking about wanting people to have the same quality experience as somebody who doesn't have a disability.
Welcome to the latest episode of Marketers of the Universe. This month, May, is Mental Health Awareness Month. I think it's Mental Health Awareness Week from the 13th as well. Our first focus today is going to be all around mental health. We will look at one of the most prominent mental health campaigns around right now and break that down, along with some other kind of mental health insights. Our copywriter, Tom Innes, will be leading that conversation. We will then be chatting to our first ever external guest. Alice has joined us from the Adaptavist Group, who are our parent company. She'll be giving us an introduction to ensuring that your marketing is taking accessibility seriously. That is going to be a really great back to basics session. There will be a lot to take away from. So without further ado, let's get on with the podcast.
As Hayden said, my name's Tom Innes and I am a copywriter at Brew Digital. With May marking Mental Health Awareness Month, I wanted to discuss the subject of psychological well-being and the role that companies can play in safeguarding it. But why would corporations care at all? So mental health refers to our psychological, social and emotional well-being, and it dictates our ability to complete everyday activities and our resilience in the face of adversity. And stats recently released by the mental health charity Mind show that 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem each year in England, and 1 in 6 will experience a common mental health problem in any given week. So this is manifesting in what our government is super sympathetically describing as a sick note culture. But if we ignore the politics of it, the reality is that we are facing a mental health crisis and it is impacting the workplace. So according to the Office of National Statistics, over 500,000 people aged 16 to 34 are currently jobless, and over a third of those cite mental health as a reason, which does bring us to today's discussion, which is what can we as marketers and individuals do to turn the tide on this growing crisis? One company who has been beating the drum of self-esteem is Dove, who for over 20 years have been campaigning for real beauty in ads. They've pledged to always use real women, not models, in their adverts, and to portray women as they are in real life. Now, this is really important in delivering their mission to help girls build body confidence and self-esteem. And that mission is actually crucial because a study they commissioned exploring social media's impact on girls aged 10 to 17 found that over half of respondents felt toxic beauty advice caused low self-esteem. Worse still, 56% felt they couldn't live up to the beauty standards set on social media, and a shocking 90% follow an account that make them feel less beautiful. Their latest advert, The Code, focuses on AI and announces their commitment to never use it to create or distort a woman's appearance. So, joining me to talk about this campaign and more broadly about the role of marketers in promoting positive mental health are 3 of my wonderful colleagues from Brew Digital: Mark Bundle, Senior Email Marketing Manager, Danica Walpole, Senior Full Stack Web Developer, and Soufi Noor, who is a Social Media Manager. Thank you all for joining me today. So before we talk about marketing, I wanted to get started by getting your response to the numbers found in the Dove survey. Have any of you ever felt the effects of social media on your own mental health?
I think it's difficult to not feel it to some extent, whether it's to the massive detriment that those Dove numbers suggest, or even just as you're scrolling through and there is so much doom and gloom, that of course it's going to have some impact on you. It's, I guess, whether you can compartmentalize it away or if it does you let it have an impact on you, which is the difficult part.
Soufi?
I would definitely agree. Definitely has some effects. I think like on my end, because we've had discussion like at the end of the day, B2B, B2C, promoting to people, but I work as a social media manager in kind of both aspects. So when I was more in the B2C, I was kind of seeing people like, oh my God, you have so much money traveling and stuff, all those kind of like sponsored posts. And then when I'm like doing on the B2B, seeing all these LinkedIn posts, seeing how like, oh wow, people my age already a CEO and stuff. So it definitely like affects at a personal level. But I think because it's also my job, at some point, I do feel like it's kind of my responsibility as well in anything I do to kind of not giving like a false impression of stuff. So it kind of goes both sides because I'm not just like the audience. I'm also working behind the scenes as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And yeah, we will sort of come back to our role as marketers within that as well. So Danica, as somebody who works in development rather than marketing, I suppose you have a slightly different perspective towards social media. What is your sort of lived experience of social media and its impact on your mental health, if any?
I think it's interesting because for me, social media from a dev perspective can be this cool tool to see what new pieces of tech people are embracing and such. But I think at the root of it, and similar to what Selfie said, is that there comes a point in which you have to look at the root cause of the issues you might have with social media. Because I could easily look at people embracing new tech or the plethora of screens that they have for their desk setup and look at that through a lens of comparison. But I could also look at it and be like, that's really cool. And, maybe I want to try that rather than beating myself up for it. But I think we all have that responsibility in how we portray ourselves on social media and how that could affect others.
I'm just looking around at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screens that I've got facing me at the moment and thinking, is this a problem? And no, probably, hopefully not. So what do you think, Danica, we'll stay with you. What do you think of Dove's campaign and specifically their commitment to never use AI? Is it helpful? Is it performative? Like, where do you stand on that?
I think it's nice. I mean, I've grown up seeing Dove campaigns. I think one of the first earliest ones I remember is when I was a child, they had this campaign where they got people to sit down and talk about themselves and they got someone to do a portrait of them. And often the portrait was completely different to how they saw themselves. I thought that was quite powerful and impactful. But I think moving with the time and then having the code advertisement where they talk about not using AI to distort a woman's image is really great. And it's a great thing to set out to intend to do. But I feel that AI is so widespread in that I can almost see immediately, let's say that Dove decide to do a campaign where they're like, oh, people should submit images of themselves and we'll put them in this ad campaign. How are you going to vouch for the fact that someone hasn't used AI on one of their own photos? And I think the issue is that AI has become so ingrained in society that you can't almost trust that someone hasn't employed it on themselves or how they want to portray themselves on social media, in that whilst Dove is setting out to do this and not use it themselves, I don't think they can necessarily 100% get away from it.
That's a really great point. Mark, I'll come to you next. Do you think that Dove are fighting a losing battle here, or are they still fighting the good fight?
Or sometimes even losing battles worth fighting. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's wrong. As Danica says, yeah, people are probably going to use AI on their own things. I mean, even things like on the new Pixel phones, we can do the best take feature. Is technically AI. It's not altering appearance or anything, it's just picking the best of a proper photo. But to say there's going to be no AI in their campaigns at all, I think it would mean sacrificing user-generated content. If they can say, yes, we ourselves are not using AI, but as they historically have brought other things in, I think they'd be limiting themselves from doing that unless they want to put a caveat on it of our content will not include this. We can't vouch for that user content.
Southie, anything to add?
I think I would agree with what both Danica and Mark said, but I think just kind of twist it a little bit more, I guess, on like the company side. I like what they're doing. Yeah, it's still a battle worth fighting for. But of course, as a business, you can't be promoting that. And as just like a quick Google search, you can kind of see like how Dove got in trouble as well with some of their products on promoting people, like people of color, about brightening their skin and stuff, So it's a little contradict when you're trying to kind of promote something really good like that. But on the other hand, you do have some other campaigns that does the opposite of that. So I think as a business, it's important to kind of stay cohesive and focused with what you're trying to promote.
So I'm going to sort of take us in a slightly different direction here, sticking on the theme of mental health and social media's impact on it. Do you think that it is the responsibility of corporations and businesses to consider users' mental health, or are they there ultimately to promote a business? And if AI generated images are the way to get eyeballs on products, then it's fine.
It's a fine line, isn't it? Yes, ultimately businesses need to make profit to survive, but more and more the drive is on doing that ethically and morally. So I think there is a responsibility to consider potential recipients' mental health. If you're creating content which is going to affect people in a negative way, chances are that's going to spread and it's going to affect your reputation. So purely on a pragmatic basis, I think you have to acknowledge what your content is doing now and making sure that you're on the kind of the right side of that ethical line.
Great, thank you. Selfie, I'll come to you last as a social media manager. Danica, how do you feel about companies considering their impact on users' mental health?
Similar to Mark, it's a fine line. I think it also depends on what you are selling. For instance, if you are marketing a beauty product, and I'll use mascara as an example, if you are using an AI-generated piece of imagery or video to show these drastic effects that you're getting from a product that you're selling, that's unethical. And also you're setting people up for failure and that they're never going to attain those results. But if you are using it to maybe enhance an image and just make it brighter and more livelier in terms of, let's say we're talking about a car vehicle commercial, and you're making the trees look greener and just overall more pleasing to the eye, as long as you are not augmenting the actual product, then I don't think there's necessarily an issue. And that comes into what businesses need to do to survive. Market.
It's enhancing without altering. Essentially, the crux of the product needs to remain the same.
100%, yeah.
Okay, and then finally, Southie, I suppose, how do you approach social media with mental health in mind? Or do you, in fact, just post out what you're told and the consequences be damned, I guess?
I do believe, considering in terms of the work side of stuff first, I would say definitely a lot of thought being put into it. And I think here at Adaptavist Group, we do have our brand team and all to kind of make sure it's aligned with our brand identity, what the company stand for, and, not putting out anything that against our values. Also, as a user, just like a normal person in the planet using internet these days, I do feel like I'm just kind of going on from that previous question. I think, yes, companies do have responsibility, 110% agree with that. But also, I think at the end of the day, we are all the consumers. So why support companies that are not promoting anything positive to the society when there are companies that are producing content and all that are actually good for the society and consumers overall? And we kind of can, change the support, go support those companies instead. So I think it's a matter of balance, like Mark said, because it's not a one-sided kind of thing. Companies have to do their part, but we all as a user also have our own responsibility, keep the internet a positive space for most people.
You took the words right out of my mouth there. It sounds like we have a responsibility to ourselves and others to ensure good mental health. I want to finish on that, which means I'm going to change some of the questions around. But are there any examples of companies or other companies that are meaningfully advocating for improved mental health in their campaigns that you're aware of?
It's not so much product based, but the TV channel Dave are really good at it. They are partnered with the campaign against living miserably, Calm, and they promote that really heavily across TV channel itself, across social media. They'll regularly kind of change it up and do different campaigns with them, and they'll even do content with some of the performers they have on contract. So they really do try and drive home that kind of reaching out to people, building connections, building bridges, and making sure that people are looking after themselves as well as just enjoying their content.
And Danica, are you aware of any great campaigns out there?
Yes, the one that comes to mind is Bumble, which is a relationships platform, really. And on their blog space, they've actually teamed up with another platform that advocates for mental health and just sort of having the tools and stuff that you need to mentally be healthy and well. So they talk about redefining personal failure in terms of whether you have a successful relationship or not. And then also follow that up with some free resources for meditation and just being more mindful generally around the topic of relationships and life. And I think that's a great example of they're still marketing what their product does, but also having that caveat of it isn't always easy And here are some tangible things that you can use to work on your mental health.
I think Bumble generally is an example of a really positive company, he says, without having seen if there are any dramas. But like the way Bumble was set up is just such a fascinating story. And I do encourage everybody to go and check them out. Thank you, Danica. Southie, any positive campaigns?
I would say there's like a lot, but I think I just kind of touched on, not to like complimenting our own company, but just to kind of like give like examples. I think other than like the big campaigns, of course, that's always good, but just something like Adaptavist Group. I think we had like an Adaptacon session end of last year, and we do have people presenting about their imposter syndrome, about their, autism like disorder and stuff. So just kind of like sharing those kind of out to the world. I think that's another like good example to just, cause sometimes it doesn't have to be a full blown campaign, but just kind of sharing it out, the information, that does a lot too as well, to kind of show that at the end of the day, mental health is like physical health. Everybody is struggling in some ways. So it's not something to be like negative about. So I would say that's another example. Instead of just the normal campaigns, something more like in smaller scale, but more consistent would be good as well.
Great, thank you. And I feel that leads us very nicely on to top tips. So Southie, we'll stay with you. What are some of your top tips for looking after mental health, both for yourself and for colleagues?
I have a long list, but I think I'm just going to give like a short answer. If it started to piss you off, just go out and take a walk or something. Because at the end of the day, that's like 7 billion people as a planet, like that's just so much negativity. My screen time is bad, but sometimes when I do feel like, there's nothing like at this point, just, go out, take a walk, go out with your dog, go out with your husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, friends and stuff, just kind of go outside. Basically, I would say just a very simple tip. When it pisses you off, go out for a walk.
Great, thank you. Danica, how about yourself?
I love that, Selfie. I think it's similarly, just stop. Sometimes I think our gut reaction to everything that we experience is to share it online. And sometimes you just don't need to. It can be really powerful to have a space for yourself where you allow yourself to not always be on a stage performing for a virtual audience, and give yourself that space to fail, try new things without that virtual feedback of whether someone thought it was good, great, liked it, or wanted to comment on it. Just stop posting.
Just take all the power out of social media's hands altogether and just stop giving them free content, and in the process, make yourself feel better. Mark, wrapping this up, what are some of your tips for mental health? I believe you're mental health trained as well, so...
Yeah, I took the mental health first aid course a couple of years ago, which is really useful. The first thing I'll say is find what works for you. We can share all the tips, we can say what works for us and what we found working for other people, but your mental health is your responsibility at the end of the day. So make sure that if you want to down a gallon of ice cream, as the Americans would say, do it. If you want to go and get a baseball bat and beat up a pillow, make sure it's just a pillow, but do it. Find that release or that quiet time or whatever it is that you need, and just make sure you find time to do that thing that is going to make you feel better.
Excellent. So there you go. You've heard from 3 experts at Brew Digital. Stop, think if you need to post it, go and touch grass, and then take a baseball bat to an inanimate object. Please do look after yourself and take the time to just ask each other, how are you doing? Sometimes even just asking that simple question is enough to lighten somebody's day.
Our next topic is looking at an introduction to accessibility in marketing. Our guest today is from the Adaptavist Group, who are our parent company. And this is actually something that we first started talking about at a conference back in December in Athens. And Alice did an internal presentation talking around accessibility in marketing. And I thought it was so good that I was desperate to get her on. So yeah, we have Alice from the Adaptavist Group here to talk to us. Welcome to the podcast, Alice.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on to talk about this. It's something I'm really passionate about. There are some things at the Adaptavist Group that we're still working on. We're still working on, our accessibility standards. But I think I said in my internal presentation, the way I see it is we have to start somewhere. So, the more that we talk about it, the better we can get at it, I hope.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's something that almost falls to the side a lot doesn't maybe become a big focus to marketers, because even though people may actually benefit from the accessibility that would be put into marketing, but they may not realize that there is an option there. And the fact that I think, I don't know if I don't have any stats, but I'd be interested to see how many people are actually doing this kind of thing consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have stats in terms of how compliant, I guess is the word. Sounds very very formal, but I think in terms of meeting the web accessibility guidelines, which is something I'll touch on later on. I don't know how many people are considered to fully meet those guidelines. It's really, really important to just try and get as many people on board, especially with kind of the basics that we're going to talk about today. And I definitely do have some stats for you on the numbers of people that are potentially affected by content not being accessible. And I think that's pretty mind-blowing to think about.
Let's start with just a quick introduction to accessibility in marketing and why it is so important as well, if that's all right.
I mean, in terms of kind of an introduction to accessibility overall, I actually went and looked up the dictionary definition of accessibility, just out of curiosity, really. There were 2 points, sort of two points to the definition. The first one being the quality of being easy to obtain or use. And the second one being the quality of being easily understood or appreciated. And I think those are two things that marketers would all agree. We want that. We want that for our content. But yeah, I mean, it goes further than that, really, because that's on a basic level, that's the literal definition of accessibility. But usually when we talk about accessibility, we mean in terms of people who might have a disability. So it's covering anything really that helps people understand and or interact with your content in a way that doesn't put them at a disadvantage for having a disability, or doesn't lessen the quality of understanding or the experience that they have interacting with your content. And in terms of why it's important, like I say, there are some quite amazing stats about how many people are affected globally by disabilities that would benefit from content being accessible, or would have different needs in terms of the accessibility of content. So a stat I found from the WHO is that 430 million people globally have disabling hearing loss. So that's the terminology that the WHO use, is disabling hearing loss. So significant hearing loss. Overall, apparently, hearing loss is over 1.5 billion people. That in itself is huge. There's also a stat from colorblindAwareness.org that 300 million people globally have colour vision deficiency, CVD, which is more commonly known as colourblindness. And there are several different types of colourblindness as well that affect how people see different colours. And then a stat from the IAPB, which is a leading global eye health organisation. As of 2020, there were 43 million people globally who are blind. So, I mean, just to summarise, that's a lot of people that you're not reaching if your content isn't accessible. And I mean, we're only scratching the surface there as well, talking about blindness, hearing loss, and colour blindness. There are many, many, many different facets to accessibility. But I think, to just start with the basics and make sure that when we're creating content, ultimately we want to appeal to as many people as possible, right? You are missing opportunities if you are not reaching some of those people.
That's incredible. Those stats are amazing. We all have our ICPs and our customer personas, and the people that are affected by those things that you've just spoken about are still going to be in those customer profiles. You're just going to be missing them by not taking a proactive approach to your accessibility. With that in mind, what are some of the basic things that marketers can be doing when it comes to improving the accessibility in their own marketing?
One of the first things that I would always say to people is captions. Captions or transcripts. It's probably the most basic thing, and yet it's something that I see people get wrong really, really often, or just not do. And I don't think that it comes from any kind of, not caring. I think people do care if they know that it's important, but I just think a lot of the time, like you say, people just don't necessarily think about it because it's not something that they've come across before. It may not be something that they've ever needed. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The people that have those accessibility needs, they are in our target audiences. They are our demographic. You want to make sure that you're reaching those people. So yeah, captions or transcription would be my first thing. So any audio or video content should be properly captioned, or have a link to a transcript somewhere. So, for example, a podcast. I understand that this does get transcribed, which is great. Obviously with a podcast, most audio only platforms, you don't have the option to add captions, but you do have like an episode description somewhere or maybe a landing page. That's where you can add in your transcript. And interestingly, leading on from the discussion of AI and the first topic, something that I've come across a lot more is AI transcription and AI captions. And I have to say they're getting better and better, but they are still not quite there in a lot of cases. So I would definitely say that, there's nothing wrong with making use of those tools to make your life easier, definitely. But it still does require a person to go through and make sure that everything is accurate, because it is surprisingly difficult to understand what's going on. If you watch any video that's been kind of auto-captioned, turn the sound off and try and follow it. And a lot of the time it gets quite complicated and quite difficult to follow. So yeah, definitely not what we want when thinking about wanting people to have the same quality experience as somebody who doesn't have a disability. I think leading on from that, another thing that is super simple that a lot of people can do with kind of minimal effort to implement is doing good alt text for images. So a lot of marketers will be familiar with alt text for the purposes of SEO. It's obviously something that helps a search engine to understand your content, but it actually is also really, really important for people who are blind or low vision and might be using screen reader assistive technology. So that technology will read out the alt text of an image to the user so that they can understand what it's showing, even if they can't see it. And of course, it's not just blind and low vision people. It's also people with old devices or a really slow internet connection. They might just not be loading the images. And if you haven't got good alt text, then they're not understanding what you're trying to show them either. So yeah, my kind of rule of thumb for alt text is, does it actually describe what you can see? If you read it or if you say it out loud to somebody, they should be able to picture what's in your picture from the alt text alone. And if they can't, then it probably needs a bit more description. There's also colour. I mean, I could go on and on and on. There are so many different things. Just the basics, picking colours that contrast well. So, a high level of contrast between your foreground and background colour when you're thinking about a colour scheme for, a rebrand or a colour scheme for a particular campaign. For people with colour vision deficiency, colour blindness or low vision, that high contrast is going to really, really, really help them to be able to still read your text, for example, on a coloured background or actually see your design. And yeah, as I said, this is something that we're constantly working on within the Adaptavist Group. We've made a lot of improvements recently on this, but I really think that this is just something that we need to start talking about more and kind of try and design things from the start with accessibility in mind.
You've nailed it with that last sentence there. I think it can be quite intimidating to go back and have to look at everything you've done and go, oh, how do we make this accessible? Actually, if you're considering this when you're building things, that's going to be massive. Now, I know marketers, I know people, these things are great to talk about, but actually going and putting them into practice is different. How do you have anywhere that people can find more information, or do you have any recommendations on tools that are going to be really useful to people who are having to go and proactively make those changes?
I think you're right. Yeah. Finding good information about this is important. So I mentioned earlier the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's also known as WCAG. That is the ultimate guide. It's the gold standard, not just for marketing, but for everything digital content across the web. It's constantly being updated, and it's essentially just a huge, huge encyclopedia. It's probably the best way to describe it, of different standards that, and I said earlier about sort of compliance being the word that they use. They give you criteria as a sort of pass-fail as to whether something is accessible. Obviously, that sounds quite intimidating. An encyclopedia of information, yes, it is quite overwhelming. I have to mention it because it is the gold standard, but yes, it can be a little bit sort of information overload if you go and look at something like that. So I would always recommend people go and look up something on there if they're curious to find out what is the gold standard, what is the ultimate guide to this. It would be that. But one of the places that you might not expect to find useful information about this, but a resource that I found really good, is actually the UK government website. Not many things I'll praise the government for, but the gov.uk website actually does have some really good resources on accessibility, and it's a lot easier to follow than WCAG. It's very user-friendly. And you can Google Gov UK digital accessibility. They've got a bunch of stuff on there that is it's a bit like open source, I guess, in software terms. It's essentially, it's the stuff they do internally, that they share that so that other people can benefit from it and kind of see their processes when they're creating content. Because obviously a website like that has such a huge audience. It has to be right for everybody. And there are also a number of actually free tools that you can make use of as well. If you are a marketer, content creator, designer, there is one called WebAIM. So WebAIM. They have a contrast checker where you can actually get a contrast threshold score between a foreground and background colour that you're intending to use, and it will literally give you a pass or fail mark for the contrast. So, if you want to test out a colour scheme nice and easily without committing to it, that's an amazing resource. There's a free Chrome extension called Colourblindly as well, which I use a lot, and that simulates different types of colour blindness. So when you're looking at a design, or again, thinking about colour schemes, you can actually simulate having different types of colour blindness. It just puts a coloured filter on your screen. But it's amazing. And I think it really brings home that understanding of how other people might be seeing and interacting with your content in a way that is just, it's not possible to imagine if you've never experienced that. And then, of course, I mentioned, there's for captioning and transcribing, there are a multitude of paid services out there where a human will do that for you. So obviously, yes, there's free AI captioning, auto captioning, transcription on a lot of platforms now. But if you do want to kind of have it done by a person from the start, a lot more accurate. There are a lot of places where you can do that. And it really, for me anyway, as I've done some manual captioning before, it really does take a long time, but these people are very skilled. They're a lot quicker, and it is worth the money, particularly if you've got kind of longer form content that you are wanting to make accessible. I would 100% recommend going and using one of those. Rev.com is a big one. Other services are available, of course. But I definitely would recommend that one, having used it a lot.
There's so much brilliant information in there. I feel like our copywriter Tom is going to have fun making sure he pulls out all of those links to post in the description. Just before we wrap things up, we're pretty much at time, or almost at time now. Is there anything that we've not discussed that you think is really important to mention when we're talking about this kind of stuff?
No, I think this is kind of, like I say, this is just an introduction. There are so many other things that we could go into. We'd be here all day. That's why there's an entire encyclopedia of this online. But from a marketing point of view, I think those are things that hopefully are fairly easy for people to implement. Make content accessible from the start, build it into your design and your content creation process. And, something that everyone can do really easily is test things as well. I really try and stress this to people. If you're producing a video, watch it with your screen turned off. Can you still understand what's happening? Have you got all the key information? Watch it with the sound turned off. Ask yourself the same thing. Are the captions good enough? Read your alt text to a colleague who hasn't ever seen the image you're describing before. Things like that are things that absolutely everyone can do, and they will improve the quality and the accessibility of your content so much. I would encourage everyone to try and start today, really, I guess is my message.
Now, that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you found some useful snippets from this session. I know for me, I'm going to be taking a lot of that information from the accessibility talk and making sure that, we are doing that. We love that you've made it this far through the listen. We hope that if you've enjoyed it, you can go and recommend the show to a friend or a colleague that you think would enjoy listening. Thank you so much, Alice, from the Adaptavist Group, for your knowledge today, and also to the Brew Digital team for their research and input. Make sure to go check out our past episodes. Subscribe on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts, and we will see you on the next one. I've been Hayden, and these guys are the marketers of the universe.